So after 2 years with no F1 racing, the travelling circus finally returns to Australia, where for the third round of the F1 season, the teams would take to the track at the remodelled Albert Park in Melbourne, with all 20 regular drivers taking part for the first time this year, provided nobody tried pulling a Novak Djokovic. Coming into the weekend, it was Ferrari on top, with the 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship and over double the points of Mercedes in the Constructors. Meanwhile, Red Bull had some momentum after a safety car caused by a Nicholas Latifi crash put Verstappen in a position to take the win. And that's all I'll say on that one. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 3 in Australia. Before we get going, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy and subscribe down below for more F1 content every week with a variety of videos. I'm sure there's something you'll enjoy. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2022 Australian Grand Prix. So in the build up to the weekend, the big news was that F1 had announced Las Vegas as a brand new race for 2023. At this point, I'd probably talk a bit more about it and put in some joke about how F1 and Vegas are a great match given how they both love to make money, but I kind of already did a whole video on the topic, so you're welcome to go check that out. Or not, it's up to you. Either way, it's still generally quite exciting for the F1 community, and a third US race behind Miami and COTA definitely helps satisfy the growth that the sport's been showing. Meanwhile, over at Aston Martin, Sebastian Vettel was cleared to return to racing after missing the first 2 Grand Prix with COVID. Though after seeing the team's performances in said races, I'm not sure how much he'd actually be looking forward to it, as going into the weekend the team were in 9th place with no points, sitting only ahead of Williams. I forgot they do actually have 2 cars running this year. Over to Albert Park and we had some major changes, with the track being altered in an attempt to create better racing. Changes included removing the previous turn 9-10 chicane to make a long high-speed section, along with the widening of many corners to promote side-by-side action. And after a combined 15 overtakes at the past 2 Grand Prix, they elected for not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 DRS zones, which I do find kind of funny considering over the past 10 days there was a decent amount of talk about if the system was still actually needed. And finally, in the run-up to the weekend, McLaren unveiled a full-sized Lego F1 car. Now, because the joke basically writes itself and it's likely to be what we're all thinking, I'll just say it. It's probably faster than the real one. On to FP1 and for the first main theme of the session, impeding. First off was Hamilton, still angry that Stroll knocked him out in Q1 in Saudi Arabia. He got in the way of the Canadian's lap in the final sector, but managed to escape the wrath of the stewards with no further investigation. Someone that wasn't as lucky though was Carlos Sainz, who after going slow at turn 13 blocked rookie Zhou Guanyu, subsequently earning himself a second reprimand of the season. And lastly it was George Russell getting frustrated as he learned a key part of being a Mercedes driver, which is to get angry at Red Bull. This was after cars got in his way at turn 9 and then at the end of the session at turn 5.
Red Bulls are getting in the way everywhere.
Though in all honesty he probably shouldn't be complaining, as it may well be his only chance to get ahead of them for the rest of the season. The other main theme of the session was drivers struggling with turn 3, as a number went deep after locking up, with the most dramatic being Kevin Magnussen, as his little adventure through the gravel brought up the topic of Haas and how they couldn't afford any major incidents as the team didn't have a spare chassis for the weekend. Towards the end of the session it was 2 veterans taking the spotlight, first off Fernando Alonso spinning the car out of turn 11 and then flicking it back round to carry on. Someone that couldn't carry on however was Sebastian Vettel after his engine gave up midway through a lap and then caught fire, prompting the return of everyone's favourite character, Fireman Seb. But what makes it even better is the end of the session, as after 45 minutes of remembering how bad the Aston Martin was, Seb decided it was time for a MotoGP career, as he commandeered a scooter and after the checkered flag made his way back to the pit lane, which did earn him a $5,000 fine, cause rules, but I think everyone can agree it was well worth it. Compared to FP1, the second practice session was generally much quieter, though for Lance Stroll that wasn't quite the case, as after complaining about Hamilton getting in the way in first practice, the Aston Martin driver whipped out his Uno reverse card, as he decided to park his car on the turn 13 apex right as Carlos Sainz came by, though this one wasn't reprimanded, which I'm quite surprised by, as so far this year race control has been like Oprah when it comes to handing them out. Fast forward about 20 minutes and it was over to Valtteri Bottas to provide the action as he took to the grass at turn 1, turning his F1 car into a multi-million-pound lawnmower. Then to round out it was back to Stroll as a piece of whatever those bits are called fell off his car, bringing out the red flag. Just before the start of FP3 it was announced that one of the DRS zones would be removed on safety grounds, so thanks for that F1 now that I've already recorded the 4 DRS zone section in the build-up. Onto the action, and the Ferrari was showing part of the reason why it was running well, as while the car would bounce around a lot on the straights, it would settle down for the corners, compared to say the Mercedes, which would also become unstable on the straight but then remain unstable into braking, and that trouble braking was more evident a little later as Hamilton ran deep into turn 11 and even grazed the wall. Moving over to Aston Martin, and they had pretty much the worst possible session. First off, Sebastian Vettel crashed out of the high-speed turn 9-10 chicane, stopping his total run time at just over an hour across all of practice, because missing 2 races just clearly wasn't enough time away from the track. Not wanting to be outdone by his teammate, Lance Stroll also put his car in the wall at turn 11, clearly deciding his team weren't working hard enough and needed even more to do before qualifying. Up at the front, and it wasn't plain sailing either, as Max Verstappen brought out his best Beyblade impressions into turn 13, and then afterwards didn't get a soft tyre lap in, leaving him in 7th by the end of the session. Into qualifying, and things were starting to look better for McLaren, as for the first time all year the Papaya cars were looking relatively competitive. However, the same couldn't be said for Haas, who in the 2 weeks since Saudi seemed to have lost 2 years worth of pace, with both cars in and around the bottom 5. But all that pales into insignificance when compared to the comedy that the 2 Canadians were about to provide, as we saw what I can only describe as the most eye-rolling, face-palming, Stroll and Latifi-esque incident maybe ever, as the 2 came together while both on slow laps, leaving Latifi with a completely wrecked Williams and Stroll with a broken car. Again, as he was quite literally on the first outlap since his car was fixed after practice. And after an investigation, the Aston Martin driver was handed a 3-place grid penalty, which did absolutely nothing as he was dropped from last place all the way down to last place. Funnily enough, he'd actually start 19th after Alex Albon was disqualified for not having enough fuel in the car, a rule that Aston Martin themselves are all too familiar with. But as a last thing on the incident, I'd say it was Stroll's fault, as in the run-up to the crash his mirrors seemed to get about as much use as Donny van der Beek did at Man United. Into Q2, and it was an early mistake for George Russell, who dipped a wheel onto the grass and had to take to the escape road, but luckily for him there was time to set a better lap, and along with teammate Hamilton, both Red Bulls and Ferraris made it safely into Q3. Also joining them was both Alpines, along with a welcome return to the final part of qualifying for both McLarens, who since FP3 had been looking much better. Someone that was probably less pleased was Valtteri Bottas, who after making Q3 for over 100 consecutive occasions was knocked out in 12th place, along with teammate Zhou, both AlphaTauris and Mick Schumacher. Then to start Q3 there was a variety of strategy, with the Red Bulls looking to set lap time straight away while others took an extra warm-up lap. Someone that was doing well though was Fernando Alonso, with a purple first sector and a personal best second he was on for a pole challenging lap time, and his pace was pointed out in commentary, which of course meant he crashed literally 2 seconds later in maybe the most accurate commentator's curse I've ever seen. But the subsequent red flag led to consequences elsewhere, as Carlos Sainz missed out on setting a lap time by about 10 metres, which wouldn't be a problem so long as he didn't bottle his lap once the session restarted. Oh dear. And while Sainz was busy qualifying 9th, things were heating up at the top. Leclerc was on provisional pole, but a lap from Verstappen took that away. But with his final lap of the session, Leclerc retook pole by almost 3 tenths ahead of the Red Bulls. And behind them was Lando Norris in 4th, beating the Mercedes pair and his teammate for McLaren's best qualifying of the season so far. On to Sunday, and before lights out there were issues for Ferrari as Carlos Sainz needed a replacement steering wheel, and while not ideal, at least meant he could get the problems out of the way before the start of the race. Getting to lights out and the front 3 got pretty decent starts, but in the case of Perez it was a little too good, as he had to back out from a move around the outside of his teammate, allowing Hamilton to get past down the inside. Also making progress was George Russell as he snuck past Lando Norris into turn 1. Someone not making progress though was Carlos Sainz, as problems with his new steering wheel led to his car going into anti-stall, dropping the Ferrari driver down to 14th in the opening corners, but I'm sure he'd start to make up places once settled into the race. And on lap 2, that's what he tried doing. I say tried as it went about as well as Everton's Premier League campaign, with the Spaniard losing the rear in turn 9, subsequently spinning off into the grass before sliding back across the track and getting stuck in the gravel. Fast forward 4 laps behind the safety car and we got going again, with the attention turning to Sergio Perez as he tried to get past Hamilton, with the move being completed a few laps later down the inside into turn 3. Towards the back it was Vettel having trouble as he went off exploring the turn 11 gravel, but at least when he rejoined he could give his teammates some company at the back of the field. Back towards the front and both Red Bulls were having issues with graining on their tyres, meaning that Verstappen was dropping off Leclerc and Perez was being caught by Hamilton, so much so that on lap 20 the Mexican was brought in, the idea being to avoid the undercut by the Mercedes. Which was fine, they just forgot about something called the overcut, as 2 laps later Sir Lewis was brought in and came out ahead of the Red Bull. Not far enough ahead though to stop Checo getting past later that lap, but with a better exit from turn 10 Hamilton looked to be getting back past. That was until the fun was spoiled by a safety car caused by a 4th crash for an Aston Martin, because as the saying goes, when it rains, it pours. This time the incident was caused by Sebastian Vettel, who got on the curb out of turn 4 and spinaled his way into the barriers, ending his race and wrecking his car, meaning that in one weekend the Aston drivers had done more damage than a right from Deontay Wilder. This of course brought out a safety car, which meant that for the second time in 2 races, an ill-timed crash would cost Perez multiple places, as just laps after clearing one Mercedes, he was now behind the other one, as well as Fernando Alonso, who elected not to change tyres. Then during the safety car a bit further back, things got pretty close, as Mick Schumacher nearly turned his Haas into an F1-shaped snooker cue, almost running into the back of Yuki Tsunoda as the drivers were warming up their tyres. A few laps later, after Seb's debris was cleared, it was time for restart number 2, during which Leclerc did his best to throw away the lead of the race, as he understeered wide out of the last corner, giving Verstappen the chance to get alongside. With the inside line, he held onto the lead. At this point, nothing much was going on, other than Perez trying to get past Russell and Leclerc pulling away from everyone. So, when the race was in need of something interesting, it turned to Red Bull powertrains, the most reliable source of drama. This was of course as for the second time in 3 races, Max Verstappen's car gave up on him, or as he put it, Then for the remaining few laps there were 2 points of interest. First off was Lance Stroll doing his best Jarno Trulli impersonation, as the Canadian was at the front of a 6-car train, which is the only thing Aston Martin will be leading all year, other than maybe the crash damage totals. Then secondly was Alex Albon, who after making his tyres last longer than a Lawrence Stroll speech was in 7th place with just 2 laps to go, and at the latest possible opportunity boxed for softs and just managed to come out ahead of Zhou Guanyu, claiming 10th place and getting Williams a point in his 3rd race, a feat that took George Russell nearly 2.5 years. Back up to the top and with the win in the bag, all that was left for Leclerc to do was the Ferrari equivalent of James's Valtteri and take the fastest lap, completing his first ever Grand Slam along with moving him further ahead at the top of the standings. Anyways, that wraps up this video. I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that subbed to the channel recently. The growth has really been great and it's all down to you guys. Remember as well, if you haven't already, to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you did enjoy. But until next time, take care.